98.7 KISS FM. That's Globe and the Whiz Kids Play That Beat, a special mix from Double Dee and Steinski.
You see, now we come to the payoff.
You've probably heard their influence, even if you don't know their names. Two friends in New York cut up records, movie quotes, and TV jingles into chaotic, brilliant hip-hop collages. Their mixes spread like wildfire, copied, bootlegged, and eventually sampled by everyone from Public Enemy to De La Soul, and it all started with a $100 remix contest they stumbled across. To understand how they influenced a generation of DJs and producers, we need to rewind all the way back to the beginning of the 80s. In the early 80s, hip-hop was breaking away from its Bronx block party roots and moving into New York clubs and roller discos. And it was around this time that Steve Steinski Stein, a record-obsessed ad man, first met Doug Double Dee DeFranco, a studio engineer with razor blade tape skills.
I was working at a studio called Clack Studios in New York, and it was a real radio production studio.
I called up and specifically said, I'm going to have a session that's like a 3-ring circus, and I need somebody who can handle this. And they said, oh, have we got the guy for you?
And while it started out as just another job, they quickly realized they shared the same obsession with molding sound. For Steinski, that obsession had already stretched way out of the studio.
At that point, I was like going to the Roxy like religion. I was there 3 Fridays out of 4. The Roxy Friday nights was hip-hop only. It was built in this enormous bus garage. It was a block long, but they had this big backdrop with all this graffiti stuff and tags on it. In front of it was some turntables on a table on the floor and a big old sound system.
Double D was yet to be bitten by the hip-hop bug. However, it wasn't long before Steinski pulled him in, dragging him to the Roxy, sharing the excitement and pulling him headfirst into the scene.
So, you ever into rap music? And he knew a couple of things, but obviously I was like, come on. And we just started going and hanging more and more and more. And then pretty soon pieces of equipment would show up in his studio. Hey, I got this Lindrum. There was that one weekend where we rented an emulator.
Week after week, they soaked in what the Roxy had to offer, studying how DJs scratched, how songs were mixed, not knowing that those nights would become formative in what was to come next.
We would just be noticing, why did some segues work at the Roxy and others not? Well, the way the scratching worked, they would let it go a little bit and then pull it back and then cut the first record and there'd be silence and then they'd let the second record go. So this was all us seeing on the dance floor because we were going every week and you get imprinted, you get it in your genetic code pretty much.
At the Roxy, they were witnessing the who's who of hip-hop, Africa Bambaataa, Jazzy J, even Grandmaster Flash and Kool Herc, all bringing their block party energy into the club. It felt like the whole culture had gathered under one roof. Nights like these lit the spark for what they'd later try out back in the studio. They were experimenting with Double D's new gear, but with secure day jobs, they had no plans to release anything until an unexpected opportunity came their way. It was a friend that presented them with this opportunity.
A friend of ours came in one day with a copy of Billboard magazine and said, hey, listen, Tommy Boy's got a contest to remix this record that you guys really should enter. They had a record called Play That Beat, Mr. DJ. And they wanted you to remix it in 5 minutes using any elements you wanted. We decided, yeah, why don't we do that?
The next Saturday morning, Douglas pulled up outside Steve's apartment with all the tools required to work on their remix.
I brought in about 6 crates of records, close to 600 records. Douglas had about 100 records, and we also had everything that was in his studio.
That studio was the one that Dee used for his ad work, kitted out with all the gear they'd need.
My studio was a basic production studio. I had 3/4-inch tape machines. One was a mono machine and the other 2 were stereo. I had a 4-track multi-track machine and a 1-inch 8-track machine and a turntable, and that was it.
Instead of razor blades and reels of spliced tape, Dee used the punching techniques he'd perfected while cutting radio spots.
What I would normally do was put the record on the turntable and cue it up and sync it up and then move up the fader when the time came to match it up. And basically that's how this was made. There were some tape edits in there on the voice sample, but a lot of it was going directly from turntable to the multi-track machine. And sometimes I would sync up and just punch in on the same track again. That saved me tracks, and that was techniques that I developed while doing all these radio spots.
While Dee engineered the flow, Steinski went full mad scientist, tossing in Little Richard, the Supremes, Bugs Bunny, even the Marx Brothers. And remember, this was before drag and drop editing. Everything was done live, and once you locked in a choice, there was no going back.
It was sort of like, well, we need something here. We need like a thing. How about, you got that Warner Brothers, how about a Bugs Bunny?
It should do this, it should do that.
It was a
Let's have
very
it do
linear
something. Yeah.
fashion as opposed to today where everything's done non-linearly. Once you start, you kind of go with it. We did it in just 2 days.
There wasn't really too many records that they could pull from for influence, as they were making something truly unique. What they made wasn't just another remix. It was something no one in hip-hop or anywhere else had heard before.
Play for the hip-hop. Play it on the radio.
Sure, do you love the Supreme Team show?
DJs were looping breaks, extending grooves, maybe dropping a vocal sample here or there. But Double Dee and Steinski built a collage, stitching together cartoons, soul records, James Brown grunts, and movie dialogue into a seamless 5-minute narrative. It set a new bar for what sampling could be. They made and sent the final version over to Tommy Boy in just 2 days. 8 weeks of silence later, they finally got a call.
I remember coming out of some meeting and my secretary was just like jumping around. He called. I said, who? She said, Tommy Boy called. You won the contest. And I called him up and I said, yeah, it's Steve Stein. I understand that me and Douglas, we won the contest. He said, yeah, I want to ask you a question. Who are you? What kind of a master mixer has a secretary?
The prize, $100, a couple of t-shirts, the Tommy Boy back catalogue on vinyl, but most importantly, the label served it to a host of big radio stations.
To our and everyone's great amazement, within a week, it was a top 10 request item on every station in the U.S. that was playing it. 2 weeks after that, people were standing on the corner in Philadelphia selling air-checked cassettes of it for $20. And in London, you could buy an air-checked cassette of it for 60 pounds. That amazed no one more than us because we didn't really see ourselves as glamorous recording artists.
Overnight, Double Dee and Steinski went from nobodies at the back of the club to insiders rubbing shoulders with their heroes. After the whirlwind reaction to Lesson 1, there was only one logical question: what's next?
That was after a few months of me and Steve basking in glory and meeting famous people. And we said, let's do something else. What do you want to do? It's got to be James Brown. And I think the original idea was James Brown's greatest screams.
So Lesson 2 began almost as a joke, turned into another collage of funk breaks and wild samples.
It started out with the joke. The joke was that we were going to do a tape of James Brown's greatest uhs.
Unlike Lesson 1, this wasn't tied to a contest. They worked on it over 2 weekends and sent it straight to Kiss FM.
I remember that we sent it to Kiss FM and like an hour later getting a phone call saying it's going right on the air. Oh my God, we could actually just get something right on the radio. And then I realized we kind of could do almost anything.
Yeah, yeah.
I got a pretty cat.
A year later came Lesson 3. This time it was tied to an ambitious project. A book on the history of hip-hop with a companion record. The idea was to license Herman Kelly's Dance to the Drummer's Beat and build a mix around it.
It was a big project that kind of fell apart when Herman Kelly said, you can't use my record. It was supposed to be a bigger project, the history of hip-hop. Wow. So he says, well, let's salvage it by doing this promo record. And they put that promo record out, and that became a really historic piece of history.
Historic is the right word. Lesson 3 was less about jokes and more about breaks.
Lesson 3.
A straight-up crash course in the building blocks of hip-hop. And for DJs and producers coming up, it was exactly that. A lesson in all the old breaks being played by themselves, from front to back. Right, time for a quick little break before we dive into the final chapter. If you're into sampling like Double Dee and Steinski, chopping, layering, flipping sounds into something brand new, I actually make my own sample packs designed for producers making hip-hop. Perfect to dig into if you're looking for some inspiration for your next beat. Right now, everything's buy one, get one free on our website with the code SECONDCOURSE at checkout. And if you just want to try a few things first, there are free packs you can grab too. We've also just launched our own Discord, So if you're a producer looking to share music, collaborate, or hear about our beat battles, we'd love to see some of you in there. And the link for all of those is in the description. Anyway, back to the important stuff. Lesson 1 lit the spark, but lesson 2 and 3 proved it wasn't a one-off. They showed this cut and paste technique was here to stay. What they built in a tiny studio in New York soon spread across the world.
Double Dee and Steinski put out lesson 3. I heard it like in '86. And this was essentially a lesson in all the old breaks being played by themselves from front to back. It was groundbreaking. Over the years, I always kept referencing that track. So when it came time for me to make my first record, I called it lesson 4. And just so happened that a few hundred miles away, Cut Chemist was doing the same thing.
That was the first time I've ever heard breaks, old records with drum beats on them. I listened to it and I was like, wow, this record was made entirely from records. And I just went bananas. I said, this is it. This is the missing piece.
For a new generation of DJs, the lessons were blueprints, a masterclass in how far you could take records, samples, and tape edits. And across the Atlantic, the ripple was just as strong.
There were some other records coming in from the States that were using cut-up techniques to sample and chop together lots of different sources of sound, and particularly Double Dee and Steinski, and we wanted to do something like that.
Coldcut took the idea and ran with it, releasing Say Kids, What Time Is It in 1987. A direct UK counterpart to the lesson. But here's the kicker. The lessons themselves became samples. Lesson number 1 popped up in Public Enemy's Cold Lamping with Flavor. Lesson number 2 was flipped by DJ Jazzy Jeff on Dumb Dancing. And the Led Zeppelin break found on lesson number 3 found new life on De La Soul's The Magic Number, courtesy of Prince Paul.
I remember playing around with that because it's such a funky break to begin with, but the record's in 5/4 time. So I said, I gotta make it 4/4. To me, the oddest thing is to years later hear that on other people's records, but it's the same edit. They took it off of that record, so it's the edit that I did, and it's kind of flattering.
By the mid-80s, these records were circulating like forbidden treasure. Half bootleg, half sacred text. And years later, the impact is still being felt.
This guy comes up to me and he said, "You Steinski?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." He said, "I want to shake your hand." And he took my hand in both of his and he said, "Thank you for making those records. They changed my life."